This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hi, my name is Scott Bellis. I played Max Fennig on The X-Files. And you're listening to the X-Cast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm Tony Black, your host, and this week we are back on the Season 2 episode trail, and we're talking arguably one of the most memorable and terrifying X-Files ever made. This week it's the turn of Irresistible. Ooh, even talking about this one gives me the chills, and I'm joined, not for the first time fully, but technically for the first time in terms of just being my only guest, by, I would say if I'm the commander-in-chief of the X-Cast blog, I'd say this gentleman is the chief of staff, or the vice president. Okay? It's Carl Sweeney.
Hello, Tony. Pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you, mate. It's really nice to have you on for an episode, because obviously you've done one round table, you've been on the X quiz at the end of the year, and as of recording, you've recorded an episode where you've hosted, which is going to be coming later on in the year, and you've become one of the singular key presences on the Xcast blog and the Xcast community, which is brilliant. So it's lovely to have you on just to talk about this cracker of an episode, really.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Tony. I had a question for you, if that's all right. I was wondering if do you use this shampoo for chemically treated hair, Tony?
Well, no, but if you want to run me a bath, then you please don't. Actually, given the context of this, oh man, do you use shampoo for chemically treated hair?
Oh dear.
So before we get into the terror of Donny Faster and his hair product questions, we're going to start by doing the 5 questions of X with you, Carl, because as I say, even though you've been on the show, and listeners who are on the Facebook group and on Twitter and everything will recognise you with that question, because, you know, you've been involved in the blog and everything. But let's discuss your fandom, your X-Files fandom. So, you know these questions off by heart by now, but first one, when did you first discover the X-Files, Carl?
I was about 7 years old, I think, when I discovered the X-Files. My memory's a little bit unreliable, which is kind of appropriate, I suppose, for the X-Files. But my memory is that my mum and dad watched the series when it started. My mum was into it more than my dad, as I seem to recall. And they used to record it because they used to go out, I think, on the night it was shown. And I just got into my head that I wanted to watch it, I think. And I remember getting up early one morning when everyone was still asleep, and I put the tape in from the night before, and the episode was Shapes. Put the opening sequence on. I don't think I didn't even make it to the opening credits. I don't think. I was too terrified, and that was it for a while. I think then I remember the following year. I remember doing the same thing for One Breath, and I did see all of that episode, but still found it quite scary. So it was into season 3. So I'd have been about 9, I think, when I became kind of a regular viewer, and then I was with it all the way until the end and beyond after that. I think from about Pusher onwards, I don't think I missed an episode.
Well, if there was going to be an episode which hooked you in and never let you go, it was always going to be Pusher, which everyone knows is my favourite. But nine is young. I mean, I don't think even I was that young, and we're not massively different in terms of age. So no. You know, nine is young to be getting into it. That's pretty cool. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and it's kind of influenced the way I've sort of approached introducing the program to my son as well, because he's 9 now, and I've got the memory of being okay with it at 9 mostly, so I'm quite happy for him to watch a few episodes here and there.
That's excellent. He's going to grow up into an X-File, the new generation, which is awesome. He'll be there when Miller and Einstein get their spin-off.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving swiftly on. Now I've alienated all the listeners. Well, speaking of episodes, what would you say your favourite episode of the show is?
This is one of those things that I sort of rethink every now and then. You know, every time I do a rewatch or something. But and there's a few which kind of jostle for the top spot. But I think most often the one I think of is Home. I think it's just a brilliant episode. I've always liked the episodes written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong. They're my favourite writers from the series, I think. And I think this is their best work. I think it's, it sort of pushes the boundaries. It's very funny in the right places. It's got some terrific sort of set pieces, and some of the interplay between Mulder and Scully is fantastic. There's nothing about Home that I think I would change. So I'll say Home is my favourite episode.
You can't really go wrong with Home. It's a standard, solid, just brilliant piece of X-Files telly, really. I mean, we get various different answers, but you're not the first person to say Home, and I very much doubt you'll be the last. Yeah. It's a classic. Were you hoping that Home Again for season 10 was going to be the sequel?
I always suspected that Glenn Morgan was trying to sort of mislead people with that. I'm okay with only seeing the Peacocks the once. I definitely would have been intrigued to see them pop up on Millennium, which I think was mooted at one point. When Morgan and Wong were running Millennium, they suggested that Frank Black could run into the Peacocks. I think that would have been an interesting episode. That
would have been cool. They did do the sequel in comic form, called Home Again, actually, in season 11. Yeah. So Joe Harris has written the Peacock sequel. So it's very interesting. It's a unique way of doing it. So anyone who loves Home should check that one out. Speaking of episodes, then let's move on to seasons. What's your favourite season then, Carl, if you had to pin one down?
Well, I've been thinking about this one a lot, actually. I got it down to between season 2 and season 3. And I think I'm going to go with season 3. I think it just offers the best mix, really. And it has the fewest low points, I would suggest, of any season. It's got a couple, but not that many. And it's got sort of some Darren Morgan sort of on top form. It's got some great mythology episodes, stuff like Pusher and Quagmire. I think if you were going to show a season to somebody and say this is sort of the breadth of what the X-Files can do, you couldn't really go wrong with season 3. It's got the comedy, it's got some scarier stuff, it's got things like, even stuff like Oubliette or Grotesque, which you could argue are a bit overlooked, but they're very effective in their own right. And it's also at the moment at which the series was at its most kind of, at its cultural height, I guess, or getting close to it anyway. And it's also when it's nailed down kind of what the series looks like and what it can do. So that's what I would say. I'd say season 3 and season 2 would be in the silver medal position.
Yeah. It's objectively probably its best period, really. I mean, it is hard to look past that, in many ways. It doesn't have many bad eggs, season 3. It's got a couple. Like every season's got a few. But there's not that many. So, yeah, it's a good, solid, standard choice, really. So, we've done episodes, we've done seasons. What about characters? Who's your favourite X-Files character, then, overall?
I'm going to say the cigarette smoking man, because every time I'd see William B. Davis's name pop up in the credits, it would always kind of give me a bit of a thrill,
Yeah.
And I liked all the sort of versions of the smoking man we saw as well, from the sort of early days when he didn't do much, you might get the odd line, and then to when you sort of when you find out about the syndicate and you realise he's kind of one amongst the group, and then the later days when he's kind of this mythic figure. I found all of those kind of versions of him very enjoyable, and I always thought William B. Davis was good value.
Yeah, he's great. Were you a fan of him in the new season?
Well, I recently rewatched all of it, including My Struggle 2, and even though that scene where he has the sort of showdown with Mulder, it's very campy, but even in that, you can sort of see William B. Davis was enjoying himself, and I think he was giving as good as he gets, as good as he could, So even though I had certain issues with it, I could sort of enjoy it for what it was.
Yeah, I mean, a few people have said how it's kind of a retread of several of those kind of conversations they've had at key episodes over the years. But that's the whole point. It is the hero facing the devil, basically. It's that archetypal conversation that never ends, really, and it's one of the keys of the X-Files. So
yeah, I don't think they ever topped the very first real one, which is the one in One Breath.
No.
But some of the other examples of it are very good. I mean, I think there's a long one in One Sun, which is good as well. But One Breath is the sort of height of it for me.
Yeah, it is the best one. And I mean, I love all the stuff they have in Amor Fati at the start of season 7. I think that's some of their best as well. But that's very different. It's not so much a confrontation. It's much more. It is when, like you said, when he's more mythic and things like that. It's a very different kind of thing. But yeah, One Breath is just sublime. That whole scene is just phenomenal. Phenomenal episode, which of course we've covered, which we did with Darren a couple of months ago. But yeah, he's a great choice. He is a great choice. He might well be mine to be honest. Or he like you know, it shifts, but yeah, he's great. So finally, then, what's your favourite moment from the entire series so far? If you could pick one.
So far, that scene between Mulder and the Smoking Man is in the number 2 spot for me.
Okay.
And my favourite scene or sequence is the sequence that ends with the murder of Sheriff Taylor in Home. So all the stuff with the Peacock brothers driving over to see him, with Wonderful, Wonderful on the soundtrack, leading up to, you know, the wife hides under the bed and he gets the baseball bat, I think. And the reason I like that scene so much is that, you know, whenever you read an interview with someone involved with the X-Files or you see a documentary or something, they always talk about how they were making little movies. And there are times when that's a bit of a stretch, frankly. But there are certain times when you can absolutely see what they mean. I think that sequence in Home, you know, the editing's brilliant, the sound design's great, there's some little nifty little camera moves, the actor playing the sheriff is fantastic, and the actress playing his wife. It's just a great little sort of horror sequence, and there's nothing I can sort of fault about it, so it's that.
Yeah, Tucker Smallwood, he's the actor involved there. He's always great. He's a great character actor. And that scene is amazing. I rewatched Home like about a year and a bit ago, and after a while, and it's still brilliant, you know. And that sequence is out this world. So yeah, that's a great choice, and overall great choices for your 5 questions, Carl. So we've got a good gauge. But anyone listening who reads the blog will know your X-Files fandom is as sharp as any of us. So but it's nice to hear it. So okay, now we've done that, let's put on some soft music, run a bath. Get some
Indian summer lipstick.
Arrange the wreaths around the bathroom. Let's slip into some in-depth talk about Irresistible. Irresistible is the 13th episode of the second season of The X-Files. It first aired on January the 13th, 1995. It was written by Chris Carter and directed by David Nutter. The story sees a mortuary attendant named Donnie Faster, who is going around collecting hair and nails and all kinds of body parts from dead corpses. And when Mulder and Scully come in to investigate a so-called death fetishist, Scully finds this case to be a little bit too much for her to handle.
In med school, you develop a clinical detachment to death. In your FBI training, you are confronted with cases, the most violent and terrible cases. You think you can look into the face of pure evil. And then you find yourself paralyzed by it.
Are you aware that you've been talking about yourself in the second person?
No. Was I?
Do you know why?
Probably is another way of trying to detach myself from it.
You're a very strong person. You've probably always felt you can handle any problem by yourself. But you feel vulnerable now. Do you know why that is?
No.
Is it your partner? Is there a problem with trust?
No. I trust him as much as anyone. I trust him with my life.
Can you talk to him about the way you're feeling?
I don't want him to know how much this is bothering me. I don't want him to feel like he has to protect me.
I know you lost your father last year. And I read in your file that you were very ill recently, that your life was threatened. These exposures can leave you extremely vulnerable.
I know these things. I'm conscious of them. I know that the world is full of predators, just as it has always been. And I know that it is my job to protect people from them. And I have counted on that fact to give me faith in my ability to do what I do. I want that faith back. I need it back.
So, Carl, out of 10, what are you going to give Irresistible?
Well, I think it's a very difficult episode to resist. I'm going to give it 9.5 out of 10.
Ooh.
Almost top marks.
Just misses top marks. Okay, why is it getting that score then?
It's getting such a high score because everybody's on top form, you know. First and foremost, Gillian Anderson is wonderful in the whole episode, particularly in the scene where she receives counselling. Nick Chinland's great as Faster. It's a very, very memorable performance. I think I'd venture to say that if you've seen this, it's very difficult to sort of forget him and the episode in general. David Duchovny, you would probably say, doesn't have quite as much to do, but what he does have to do, he does marvellously. David Nutter directs, and he generates some real effective tension, and there are some great horror moments throughout. There's some of Chris Carter's best writing, I would say, some of his sharpest writing as well. Barring one moment I'm not a massive fan of, there's not much to quibble with in this episode, I'd say.
Go on then, put us out of our misery about that one moment. What is it then? What's the thing that prevents it being a 10?
I'm a little bit uncertain about whether the moment where we see Faster shapeshift in front of Scully is necessary. I think without that moment, the episode wouldn't be any weaker, and you could argue that sort of the ambiguity about Faster would be sort of heightened even. I love all the stuff with him, you know, the flashes of him as kind of a demonic figure. I think that works brilliantly. But I feel that moment slightly doesn't sit right with me. Only slightly. And I think there's some sort of broader issues around Faster in that respect we can talk about.
Oh yeah, we will get into that, absolutely. Because it's crucial really to understanding the deeper layers of what Chris Carter's trying to do with this episode. But yeah, it is, I can understand where you're coming from, because it is the one overtly supernatural moment in an episode which is defiantly not paranormal. And, you know, it's there's a lot with Irresistible. I mean, the first thing to talk about is, well, firstly, just to get it out of the way, I'm going for a 9 out of 10. Okay, so I'm pretty much the same as you with this. I agree with everything you said. I think it's just terrifically put together. I think the writing's sharp. I think the direction is typically David Nutter in that it's a cut above a lot of what you normally get, really. Especially, and we'll go into more detail about that later. But, you know, it's just a really chilling, scary, memorable episode. But the key thing with it is that they didn't want this necessarily to be a supernatural story. You know, Chris Carter had said that I was able to explore the character of Scully in a way I wouldn't have been able to with a supernatural theme. He said sometimes even more scary than the things we can imagine are the things that are unimaginable, which is that the man standing next to you could be this kind of guy. Sometimes the face of evil can become frighteningly real and distorted through a prism of your own unconscious fears. That's what we were playing with. And that's the whole idea of this episode, is that Donnie Faster isn't necessarily a monster. He's described as a monster. The idea of a death fetishist, of somebody who's, you know, digging up corpses or going around mortuaries, cutting off hair and getting this weird kind of desire out of it, is, you know, terrifying, and then obviously leading to murder. But it's very different in the sense that it's not supposed to be supernatural, isn't it? Yeah,
and all that stuff with Scully, and I think the guy in the funeral home at the beginning also sees Faster as a demon. You get the sense that what they're aiming for is to show it's Scully's attempt to make Faster's evil sort of palatable, is to imagine him as kind of a demon or a devil. Whereas what's really frightening about it is that he's not that. They describe him as a boy next door type figure. So that moment where Scully sees him shapeshift slightly takes things in a different direction. Now, I'd still argue that what Scully sees at that point may not be to be taken literally, because I think there's a couple of things earlier in the episode which point to that, to her sort of viewpoint being unreliable. But I think if you took that moment out of the episode, I don't think it would lose anything. The only other note I had, and this is not, I'm not marking it down for this, but I thought it was worth mentioning, is I read a review of this episode. It was a very positive review, but it talked about the way that Minneapolis is portrayed in certain points of this episode as being unintentionally hilarious. And I think what it's talking about is, all the stuff is earlier on in the episode where Agent Box is talking about, we can't get any extra policemen on a Saturday, this isn't New York, that kind of thing. I think what the writer I read was saying was that doesn't really ring true for sort of mid-90s Minneapolis. Now, I don't know if you're like me, Tony. Whenever I used to watch the X-Files, I paid no attention to how the different states and cities were portrayed, really. I had no idea. No. So that might be something our sort of American listeners can comment on. I get the feeling Carter, my instinct is he probably is laying that stuff on a little bit thick, to be honest. But I don't think it's a problem as such.
He might be. No. I mean, this is the whole thing, whenever, I don't know about you, but whenever I see a British show that is, or even an American show set in Britain or with British elements that don't get things right, I do get a bit, oh, come on, that's obviously, like, there has never been a show, I work in a school, there has never been a show, I don't think, on television that's ever properly represented what a school in the UK is like, right? Yeah. Every time I watch something, I go, oh, that's rubbish, that would never happen. But yeah, I think there's a difference between that and a certain specific city not looking the way it should or not being represented in the right way. I don't think that takes away from the story that they're trying to tell, really.
No, I think, like I say, the writer I read, he was just talking about, I think at one point he says, we can't get anyone on a Saturday, we might not be able to get any extra help until Tuesday. And I think that's not too dissimilar from the way that the town in Home is portrayed, where they're kind of cut off. But it's only a couple of lines. I don't think it's much of a problem, really.
No.
But it may just be one of those details that's kind of functional for the sake of the story.
Perhaps. There's a few details about this that make it unique beyond, obviously, the fact that they're trying to draw that point about a city not having resources. The first thing is that it was supposed to be about a necrophiliac, but the network said no. They were fine with death fetishists. Yeah. They were fine with what they got in the end. Yeah, it's fine. Cutting up bodies, it's okay. Murdering prostitutes, all good. Because is he going to have sex with them? No. They thought that was too far, and that the sexual content was implied. I actually think that was a good note from the network, because I think it makes Donny Faster a far more interesting character in that he's not just somebody who's trying to have sex with dead people. He's far more complicated than that, in that his fetish is about taking pieces of them, which, is something, as I say, we'll get into it again as we go in through the episode. But I think it's interesting that's that's there, and they didn't go down that necrophiliac route.
No, I think you're right. I don't think you can look at what we did get and say, it's not sort of tasteless enough. It needs to be it needs to be more than it is. I think what's also interesting is if you look at the scripts Chris Carter had been turning in for season 2, I think the one before this is Red Museum, isn't it? And in that episode, in that episode, you've got the figure of the sort of peeping Tom, who spies on the women, and you sort of get the sense that Carter's mind is sort of turning to the kind of subject matter that will form the basis of Millennium, and Irresistible is the one which really sort of crystallizes that vision. But even in Red Museum, and even if you go back to Dwayne Barry, you've got Dwayne Barry, where the sort of paranormal aspect of it is kind of secondary a lot of the time to sort of Dwayne Barry's sort of psychological state. So you've got sort of Chris Carter in season 1, he's concerned with UFOs and things like the Jersey Devil, and then as you get into season 2, he's sort of starting to become more interested in kind of real world, sometimes sexual horror. It's quite an interesting thing to sort of watch happen.
Definitely. The Millennium thing is a huge point with this episode, because he has gone on record as saying this is the episode that inspired him to create Millennium, which obviously I'm sure most listeners will know was his second major series that aired, that premiered at the beginning of the X-Files season 4, and in the end becomes a spin-off show from the X-Files. It's set in the same universe. And that is full of Donny Fasters in many respects. Certainly the first season, which is... Millennium is interesting because each season has its own different style, and they cover very, very kinds of different versions of looking at the coming millennium and the idea of the apocalypse. But the first season is all about really twisted serial killers and really dark and weird serial killers. If anyone has seen Hannibal, the TV show Hannibal, that is basically Millennium, but for a modern audience. Millennium was doing that stuff 20 years ago, and this is the moment where you see, a light bulb would have gone off in Chris Carter's head and said, this character and then what Mulder is basically trying to do in this episode is a series. And that's obviously where Frank Black, the point where Mulder is at one point saying to Box, giving a profile of this guy, and he's going, no, he's got links back to his mother. He wouldn't be. That's Frank Black in many respects. I was watching it and I was thinking, this is Frank Black, just as a proto version without the extra Frank Black elements. So yeah, the Millennium influence cannot be underestimated. It's huge to this, and this episode is really the point where I think the show embraces just how scary it can be. It's been weird before. It's had creepy episodes. But I don't think up until this point, I don't know about you, Carl, I don't think the show had been this scary up until this point.
Well, I suppose you have things like Tombs and maybe Ice, which are pretty scary in their own right. But, yeah, this is a very, very disturbing one. Yeah, I mean, I would agree that this is, if Home is scarier, this is certainly in one of the top few if you were making a list of scariest episodes, isn't it? But also, even, like you say, the Millennium influence, but even in going into the sort of season 3, when you have episodes like Oubliette and Grotesque, which you can sort of see that without Irresistible, they may not have got to that kind of episode quite as quickly.
Yeah, Paper Hearts is another one.
Paper Hearts, yeah, absolutely.
There's quite a few that come up over the seasons that, owe a real debt to Irresistible, and I think, without this episode, you may not have had those, and you may not have had Millennium, really. It's a very important episode in terms of Chris Carter, as well as in terms of his development as a writer and the kind of things he was interested in and wanting to do. It's very important to the X-Files overall, really, and that's why I think it's so well remembered for lots of different reasons. So IMDb give this a 8.3 out of 2,539 votes, 8.3 out of 10, which puts it not in the top tier of Season 2, which is why IMDb is unreliable as an aggregator.
Yeah, that's very surprising, I must say.
Yeah, it's not up there with episodes like Colony and Endgame and Anasazi, which, are probably among the best, Dwayne Barry, that probably are among the best episodes of the season, but, yeah, I think it should be. I really do think it should be up there.
I suppose I can understand why if somebody was squeamish or, some people just do not like watching scary stuff. I can sort of see why somebody who feels like that wouldn't particularly get along with this episode.
That's true. But yeah, so it's still got a good rating amongst the quorum, but I think it's perhaps a little bit underrated there. So let's talk more about this episode in detail and let's pick apart Irresistible. So this episode begins, firstly, just to point out as well, because I didn't mention that before, this episode was originally supposed to be called Fascination, and then they went with Irresistible later on to tap into Donnie Pfaster's own personal fetish, and it begins with Donnie at a funeral, the funeral of a girl called Jennifer, who is the typical archetypal girl that he's going for, really, throughout the episode. She's blonde, she's young, and there are lots of things in this teaser, which is all about her family grieving over this. We don't know why she's died. It could be an accident, but she's young, so the family are really upset and everything like that. And you've got Donnie there, who's just an attendant, a mortuary attendant, and he's already uber creepy, isn't he? Straight away.
Yeah. Now, I mean, what do you think about? Do you accept that Donnie Pfaster could have got through life without raising some more suspicions than he has up to this point? Do you know what I mean? Because the way he turns his head and everything, the way he talks, it just creeps me out from the moment I see him. Whereas with someone like John Lee Roach in Paper Hearts, I unquestionably accept that he would have got through life as a vacuum salesman without sort of raising the alarm. With Pfaster, it sort of makes me wonder a bit more.
It's a good point, yeah, because, the simple fact is that he's got a very, Nick Chinland, who plays him, and plays him magnificently, it has to be said. Yeah. He's got a very deliberate poise about him. He plays this very theatrically, actually, and it's very precise, and he's going for a very specific kind of archetype in that Donnie is he's not the guy next door. I think to an extent the episode wants you to believe that he's the guy next door. Yeah, but if I was living next door to this guy, I'd be fucking moving.
There's kind of a bit of a tension, like you say, between that idea of him as the guy next door, or the boy next door. Even in those photos at the very end, he looks kind of looks pretty scary. When you see the childhood photos, and like you say, between this, it is a fantastic performance. It's kind of the stillness of him. So that means that the slightest movement he makes becomes very frightening. And it starts from the beginning, doesn't it? When he's in the funeral home, you see him stood still and he turns his head. I think what's disturbing here is the implication of how many times has he done this and got away with it.
Definitely. There is, by the point that obviously he gets, the funeral's over and he's, stroked Jennifer's hair creepily and, gone over her body. He's then doing his business before he gets caught. Yeah, and there is that suggestion. But one thing to say, since we were talking about Nick Chinland, is that he stood out straight away when they were casting this episode. Chris Carter said, we saw many actors, but he said it was difficult to cast, but there was a quality I was looking for, and I couldn't put a name on it. He said, I finally figured out what it was when Nick came in, and he had a kind of androgynous quality that worked. I thought he looked like Joe College, but he could scare the hell out of you. And the androgynous thing is interesting, because that's not something that he's played in the episode as such. But then I suppose it ties into the idea of him metamorphosizing, and him appearing as a demon in people's eyes, which it suggests that he's not quite man, and there are perhaps some feminine aspects to him in the fact he's interested in women's nails, he's interested in hair. So a lot of the psychology of where he comes from is about sisters and about feeling like he was the boy surrounded by women and a hatred of them.
He reminds me really of two sort of classic film characters in a couple of ways. So, like we talked about, what did he say? His deliberate poise. That reminds me a little of Hannibal Lecter, as played by Anthony Hopkins. I think the way he moves is somewhat similar, but also the sort of, especially when you get to the climax in his mother's house, I find it hard not to think about Norman Bates and Psycho.
Yeah.
Whether those, I know The Silence of the Lambs was a big influence on Carter, especially with Clarice. I'm not sure about Psycho, but whenever I see this episode, I think of those two films.
Yeah, that's really good, actually. I can totally see that. I think that extension of Hannibal certainly is the fact that the biggest reference point in the real world for this episode was Jeffrey Dahmer, who was the serial killer and sex offender who dismembered 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991, who was executed just a matter of weeks before this episode actually went on air.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, November 1994 he was killed. He was nicknamed the Milwaukee Cannibal, as many of his later murders involved necrophilia and cannibalism, neither of which Donnie does, but he could end up doing, if he wasn't caught. Or, we don't know, he might have done them. It's all part of this.
We don't really see him in the act, do we, very much? We see a lot of him sort of in the build-up to committing these acts, but exactly what he does and what he's like when he's doing it is left open, isn't it?
And it's left open to debate. And in the end, Dahmer was convicted of 15 of the 16 murders he committed, but he was found legally sane during the trial, although he was diagnosed with multiple psychological disorders. In fact, he wasn't executed; he was beaten to death in the Columbia Correctional Institution by another inmate in 1994. So he would have been executed, I'm sure. He would have been on death row. But, he was beaten to death in the end. But, yeah, those kind of archetypes and those kind of real-life serial killers are another scary influence for Donnie and form that character who, as I say, gets caught in the act by the other morgue attendant who... Did you notice the quirk of him licking an ice pop as he walked into the...
What's that about?
Do you think they wanted to give him a little quirk? I thought it maybe represented the fact that he was very blasé about his job. He got to that point that he could go in there with an ice lolly, surrounded by corpses. Yes. He's got to that point where he's desensitised to it all.
Yeah, that could be it. I guess so.
But then he sees Donnie, sees him as a demon, as you mentioned before. We're going to put a pin in the demon stuff because we're going to come back to that later. But let's not forget that he sees him as a demon as well.
He does. Yes.
But then he screams at him, "You freak!" And he tells him, "Get out of here! Get out! Go on!" And interestingly, this last shot of Donnie walking towards the camera and into black, they did that 3 times on the X-Files. They did it. Okay. Can you name the episodes? Actually, here's a little quiz. Quiz within an episode. Go on.
Okay, so do you mean 3 times, including this one?
Yes. Or so you've got one. Okay. It's somebody walking towards a screen.
Because, I remember Krychek walking towards the camera at the end of Piper Maru when you see his eyes fill with
ding,
the
ding,
black
ding,
oil.
Ding. That's one.
I think there's another shot like this in Orison at some point, but I can't remember where.
I wish I had a prize. Ding, ding, ding. I wish you had a prize, Carl, because you'd have got one. Well done. Nice one. Yeah. he does the same thing. They repeat the shot in Horizon, which is the sequel in which Donnie reappears in season 7. They repeat the shot. And the other one, is Krychek when he's possessed by the black oil.
And actually, I just thought this reminds me of. Have you seen the remake of Cape Fear with Robert De Niro?
Not for years, but yeah.
Oh, I'm sure when he leaves prison, I'm sure there's a very similar shot where he walks into the camera as well. Yeah, whether it's a specific reference, I'm not sure. But
well, it wouldn't surprise me if David Nutter was inspired by Scorsese. Like a lot of directors are. So yeah, could be.
Who knows?
Who knows? But
I can't remember if this is the only time he directs a Chris Carter script, because I think in the first season he normally directed the Glenn Morgan and James Wong stuff. So it's quite nice to see him working with Carter.
Yeah, I don't think he did direct any other. Oh no, he did. He directed Red Museum. He did direct Red Museum. Yep. But yeah, it's only one of two, and arguably it's their best collaboration. Nutter didn't direct anymore after the middle of season 3, sadly. That direction is all over the episode. We get out of the teaser, and we've got Mulder and Scully coming in and we meet Mo Box, played by Bruce White. Love this guy. I love this guy.
I love him too. I think it's a real shame we didn't see him again. To be honest.
Yeah, totally. They could have brought him back because he was quirky, not just in the fact that Bruce White plays him in a really down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth. You can imagine this guy being a main character on, like, Law and Order or one of those kind of shows. He just... It was whether or not it was the writing, which I think it partly was, but it was the character actor who made it better, I think. He really brought something to the part.
He's got the interest, hasn't he, in the paranormal. So you'd think that if they wanted to find a way to sort of bring him back into the fold, they probably could have.
Yeah, exactly, because he's talking about how he's got a friend at MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and he's saying, oh yeah, my mate Andy at MUFON, you know him? And Mulder's like, I don't know. He's like, well, he knows you. And he's obviously suggesting that this horrendous grave spoiling, this fetishism that's happened at this cemetery in Minneapolis is aliens.
Well, he says something about cattle mutilation, and he says the hairs and the nails have been clipped like in a cattle mutilation. But I don't know, is that what happens in a cattle mutilation? Do they cut the I don't know.
cut the cow's nails. Yeah, I'll give him a little a little bit of a manicure. I don't know. That's one to look up, really. But Mulder immediately sort of with a bit of humour, he blocks that off, and he goes, "No, this isn't aliens. This is something human." And because what I think I really liked about all this, and it's all kind of encapsulated in this scene, really. Box can't quite get his head around the idea that a human being could have done this because it's so twisted and horrendous. Mulder takes it in his stride in a way that a lot of people wouldn't because of his background in violent crimes, which we know about and it hasn't really been massively explored in the show. But he was doing the Frank Black job, really, when he was younger. When he was just fresh out of the academy in the late 80s and things. So he's seen pretty much everything evil that you could possibly imagine, really, over the years. But the most interesting fact is how Scully reacts, isn't it? And that's why this is really more of a Scully episode than a Mulder episode.
Yeah, and because even though it's not mentioned for a little while, but we know, if we've been watching the series, that it's only a few weeks or months since she's been returned from her abduction.
Yeah.
So I like the way that's not really... It's dealt with quite subtly most of the way through. That the kind of weight of that experience is sort of playing into her state of mind.
Because it's not too overt, is it? You don't even really get the callbacks to things until very late in the episode when she sees Karen Kossoff, the counsellor. But it's there, isn't it? It's the underlayer. And I think what I really like about this episode is that it takes a while for it to come to a head, really. It's bubbling away for like the first half of the episode where Scully is visibly distressed all the way through, and Gillian Anderson is playing it really lovely in that she just can't cope with this, and you can see it on her face, you can see it on her reactions. Mulder's typically Mulder in that he doesn't quite get it, he doesn't quite see it. It takes a little bit of time for him to start going, she's not herself here.
Yeah, but I like the way he acts, because I think he's kind of supportive at the right times. And I think in the early part of the episode, he's not too presumptuous, is he? He doesn't make a big deal of it. But when she later on, he kind of he sort of takes what would be a kind of a stereotypically feminine approach, isn't he? Because he sort of says you're allowed to be, it's okay not to feel good about this. Whereas Scully's a bit trying to sort of keep things bottled in, which
Yeah.
arguably is a more sort of stereotypically male approach to things.
Definitely.
So yeah, there's all sorts going on in this episode.
It's very layered. It's very layered, and you're absolutely right in that there's a lot about the archetypes being flipped, and the idea of that the male agent is the one who's supposed to be stalwart and stuff, and he's the one doing the feminine aspects. So it's very true. It's very true, and it's very well encapsulated in this episode. Yeah. But and the humour's there with Mulder as well. It's like how he's more interested at the beginning in the sports game that's going on. He's got the tickets for the football game. We've got 2 tickets, and then when they go to see Box, Box is watching the football, and then as Box is talking, Mulder cranes around Scully a little bit to have a look at the match.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's great.
Yeah, I love those little details. I mean, I wonder if any fan fiction was written about them actually going to the game. It's nice. It's nice to see Mulder sort of worrying about something other than work for a change, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it is nice because and it's brought up a couple of times in the show. That he is outside of work. The only 2 things he's probably interested in are sports and porn. Those are his only 2 other hobbies. So it is nice when they do the sports as well as the porn, which they do more.
Yeah,
but yeah, in between this, you've got Donnie going to easily the creepiest interview I've ever seen on screen, where he's trying to get an interview as a delivery driver.
Yeah, because this is what I was talking about, really. I mean, the way he talks to the woman who's interviewing him, I'm sure my alarm bells would be ringing at this stage, but she's pretty okay with it, isn't she? So
well, she seems to have a bit of a thing for him. When he's being a bit charming. And he goes, "Oh, I'm actually doing comparative religions at uni." But she's like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll just tell Mr. Fucicello that you get." It's like, love, he's clearly not normal, right? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it is an interesting question. And this, it comes back to something that we'll talk about later, which is about the potential psychological influence Donnie might have on people, which could account for some of the almost supernatural things that we see. It could be that there's an element with Donnie, a little bit of, not mind control or anything as reaching as that, but some element of psychological effect on people. And whether or not that's the fact he's got a supernatural element to him. But people seem oblivious to the fact that he is creepy as fuck,
Yeah. I think, I suppose, like we were talking about earlier, if he's got through life, undetected, he must be highly adaptable. So, yeah, whether it's mind control exactly, I think it's just that he's actually quite alive to what he needs to do to sort of to get by, basically. All the stuff about flattering her with knowing the shade of lipstick, because I think that's the moment where she sort of where she starts to like him, isn't it? I believe.
Yeah, it could be. The adaptability is probably what it is, really. But anyway, he gets the job, so he's now a delivery guy, and this is the point where Mulder's starting to put out there to Box. You mentioned it earlier about how. That in this small town, they can't really get their head around the idea of this might happening because he says the word an escalating fetishist, which in itself is a terrifying title. But then it's the kind of thing, I think what Carter does really well in this episode is that he brings something that is completely, niche and terrifying and scary into an environment that are used to just busting busting perps and, burglaries and the occasional homicide. These guys aren't prepared for a death fetishist.
No, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. And also, what's really good, I think, is the way the sort of threat escalates. So, dead bodies, which is bad enough, but they're already dead. So, when he moves on then to street workers, I mean, that's a bit more disturbing. But because they work in the street, they're obviously a bit more vulnerable. And then he sort of gradually moves into, doesn't he? He goes to see the middle class family. He sees the student, and then finally, sort of turns his gaze to Scully. So I think all the way through, the kind of threat he poses sort of ramps up in a certain sense. It does
build, it does escalate, and it's the point where he kills the prostitute, which is really where it kicks off in lots of different ways. And that whole sequence where he gets her back to his apartment, I wondered actually about at one point she gets in the apartment and she says, "Oh, it's freezing." And I thought to myself, well, is that because Donnie's a demon and he doesn't need things to be hot? Genuinely, I thought maybe that's why.
I think, isn't it just because he is not used to, he doesn't have company, so he's not too bothered, I guess. I didn't take it the way you, maybe I didn't take it the way you did, but
I'm probably reaching,
because
although
I think you're coming from it from the aspect that he is supernatural, whereas I think I'm going to push back a bit against that when we get there.
Okay,
I think if you're building that case, I think that's a good point to make. I think.
Yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, when I lived alone, I hated it when it was cold. I had the heating up no end. I spent a fortune on electricity bills, but yeah, it's a possibility. But then, of course, we get the line, "I'd like to run you a bath."
And the water is cold that he pours, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
She comes back and says the water's ice cold,
which is creepy as well. But before that, you've got the whole idea of him. You know, she's confused as to why he wants her to just have a bath. You know, and he doesn't want to have sex with her. But the sexualized element is very visible, isn't it? When she starts to take off her shoes and he sees her nails, you know, her red nails. There's just that look in his eye, that a bit like when Toombs saw them and saw their livers, and then it was the thing. He gets a little bit of that just combination of lust and I think just consuming, well, you know, obsession. And this is why he's interesting, because I think that the psychology behind it is that he feels like he needs to possess these women. He needs to possess something of them, which is why he takes first from their dead bodies, because he can't do it in real life. He can't form a proper relationship with anybody. And then obviously he kills because the compulsion grows. I think that, would you say that's this underlying part of the underlying psychology here with him?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. Yeah, and I think that moment you talk about where he sort of eyes her up, it's kind of like what we were saying. I mean, that look he gives her, or he's looking at her shoes, like you say, that does enough, doesn't it? You don't necessarily need to see much more than that. That detail is eerie as it is.
And it's like you said, you don't see him kill anyone. You know, that's a really good thing. You know, she sees the wreaths in his bedroom, which is freaky as hell. It's really scary. And then she runs off screaming, and he chases her down. Well, he doesn't even chase her; he just walks after her, doesn't he? And you've got the shadows on his wall. Yeah,
that moment where his shadow looms over her. That's an excellent sort of bit of directing. I think that's a great shot.
It's a great shot. There's really loads of them in there. You know, there's the great shot of the shadow, yeah. And then you've got Mark Snow's really sort of oppressively gothic music, just synth building that, you know, going on in the background, which is just really good. But then it cuts to the body, you know, and so you don't see him, you know, savagely kill this woman, which he obviously does, and you've just then got this corpse in the middle of the road, the sheet covered over, stained with blood, because he's basically just ripped her face off or whatever. And I think it's the classic thing, isn't it? Imagining what it looks like is worse.
When I went back to watch this for the first time, when I was watching episodes before the revival series, I probably imagined this was a more violent episode, explicitly on-screen violence than is actually the case. Like you say, I think in this kind of thing, what's suggested can be very powerful.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to Irresistible, in that, you know, the Home is probably a scarier and more disturbing episode than this, but Home very visibly shows the violence in a couple of places. Like as we talked about earlier, the Sheriff Andy Taylor bit where he gets killed. That's you don't see all of it, but you see them going to town a little bit on bodies. But in this, you don't see Donnie do anything like that, and it's the implication of what he's capable of is scarier really than seeing him actually do it. And seeing Scully's reaction, you know, to that body, because she just can't cope with it. You know, when she sees that body mauled, she can't do her normal thing. You know, and even when she later does the autopsy, you know, you've got the really interesting use of voiceover and field report that happens throughout this episode, mainly from Scully, but it overlays her doing the autopsy to make the point, and she's talking about, you know, the manner of death and how a body tells a story. But it's very much that this isn't a normal autopsy for her. This is something that he's just getting to her. And I thought that was great.
Oh, it was, yeah, because you've got, like you say, a very clinical voiceover, which is what we hear, but what we see is her sort of struggling to kind of do her duties as normal, really. So, yeah, I think that's a great little scene where you've got the voiceover doing one thing and what we see on the screen doing another. It's very good, and it's getting into Scully's psychology about this as well at the same time, which I think is key to the episode, really, because that's what gives this its extra layer in many ways. At the same time, Donnie's off doing his job. You know, he's been the delivery man, going to a normal family. The actress here, the mother, sticks in my head because she later plays
similar kind of role in a way when she's in Too Shy, which is not the same episode, but there's similar sort of elements to it. And she gets killed, I think, in Too Shy in the end. She's like a mom in that. She's got a blind daughter. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, that's right. So her weak point, whenever she turns up, is that she sort of turns a blind eye to sort of disturbing characters, doesn't she? Because she quite fancies the guy in Too Shy.
Yeah,
and she's obviously invites Donnie in here. So that must have been her niche as an actress, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, somebody who's just naturally sort of nice and
naturally trusting. Yeah,
naturally trusting. Yeah, he's got his eye on her daughter as well. Then, and he finds the hair in the bin. And he's getting off on it.
Yeah.
It's just chilling. It really is chilling.
It's a very, very, very creepy scene, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very. After you've got Mulder then explaining to Box about the psychology, which we've talked about before, and making the point that this is goes back to his mother and a deeper hatred of women and things like that. You've got Donnie then, you see him in his classes, don't you? He says he's taking night classes, and he's eyeing up a blonde, short-haired blonde. And then, again, he's so not a normal guy when he goes up to her and in the car, excuse me, do we have to do question 4 or question 5? You wouldn't do that, would you? If you come out of that, you go,
no.
"Oh, hiya, I was just in your class. Sorry to bother you. I know you're going home. What did he ask us to do again? Oh, cheers, thanks, bye. Not,
yeah.
Excuse me. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Dude! But to her credit, she is scared of him. She does know he's weird.
No, she
which is good.
Clocks that straight away, doesn't she? But she can't get away, I suppose.
But why doesn't she, though? When he puts his hand on the door and he says, "Don't go," and then she kicks him in the bollocks, why doesn't she just get in the car and drive off? Instead she goes, "Help me!" and runs away. I'm like, what are you doing? Get in your car and drive.
Yeah. More to the point, I think. Yeah, well, why does she then drop the charges later? I mean, do you remember he gets out of prison because she drops the charges? I think that's a bad move. Yeah, personally.
Is it because he didn't do anything? Technically, he just was creepy, really, because he didn't do anything to her, did he? He didn't hurt her. He didn't, assault her or anything.
How awkward would it be to go back to class the following week, though? You know what I mean?
Hi. I'm the guy you locked up last week. How are you? Do you use shampoo in your hair? Yeah, it wouldn't really work, would it?
Not ideal.
In the meantime, Scully is having a demon dream, isn't she?
Yeah, that's an interesting moment. So before, this is the first time she sees a demon figure, isn't it? When Faster's not present. But also, we've skipped past it. I can't remember exactly where it is. But there's a moment earlier in the episode where she's looking at crime scene photos, and for a second she sees herself in the crime scene photo. Then she looks back and she sees she's another person.
I knew. Yes, right. This was in my notes. I missed it earlier. I thought that was what had happened, and it was her face. And I've got a note actually, and I missed it, and it was that looks a lot like Gillian Anderson. Good. I'm glad you spotted that because. Yeah. That is almost blinking you'll miss it in a way, because it could have been read as she's just disturbed by the crime scene photos. Not that, shit, that's Scully? So there's a psychic thing going on here, isn't there? Possibly.
Yeah. I'm building the case here for when we get to the end of the episode, and what I'm saying is that Scully's view is unreliable, okay? So she sees herself in the crime scene photos. She has the nightmare where she sees the demon. And then later on, she sort of, again, we see from her point of view, we see her imagining Faster shapeshift, all right? So I'm saying that moment is Scully's projection rather than something that literally happened.
Okay.
That's where I'm going with that.
We're building to a climax in this episode, guys.
Yeah,
me and Carl and I show down on this. We're getting there. Okay, good theory.
Okay.
They, of course, now have got another suspect, a guy who's clearly not a death fetishist. He looks like somebody they've just got in from the local bar. But there's another great shot by David Nutter, isn't there? When Mulder and Box go in to speak to him, Scully stands there outside, and behind, pull frame, and you've got Donnie staring from the cell behind.
Yeah. That's the moment, really, where I start to think of The Silence of the Lambs, because in a strange way it echoes a similar scene in that film, even though the sort of dynamics of it are a bit different. in both cases, you've got the prison, you've got this kind of miserable, abject place where really Scully's the one with the power. She's not confined, but because of the way he looks at her, at that moment, he's the one who's got the power over her. I think it's really well done.
Definitely, it underscores his power, what he's trying to do, the fact that the devil, the demon, the evil is there, but they can't quite see it yet, which is great. It's just out of shot for them. And this, of course, is, Donnie gets the information about Scully from the other guy, which he's doing a little bit of his own detective work. He's seen her, he's interested now. She's become his new target. But this is the point where Scully just says she can't do this. Well, she doesn't say that, does she? She tries to sort of cover it by saying, "Oh yeah, I'll just go back to Washington. I'll go and do some evidence gathering. I'm better off doing that, really." But Mulder knows, doesn't he? He's like, "Look, if this is too much, this destroys people who've done this for 20 years. If this is too much for you, don't worry."
But to her credit, she makes the right choice, because she goes back to Washington and it does get the investigation sort of going again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah. I really like that fact that it's not, she doesn't just go, the writing, the script doesn't just say, "Oh, Scully goes off, has a bit of counselling, comes back." She actually goes off, does find something very crucial as well. And I thought that was very good, in that it's not just arbitrarily getting her over there just so she can have some counselling.
It's good that she, because there's loads of episodes where Scully gets herself into trouble, or to put it another way, trouble finds Scully. But in this one, she's sort of given the ability to make choices which influence the rest of the episode, which is one of the reasons I really like it, to be honest. Yeah,
it's very good. There is a common criticism from quite a lot of people. And I'm finding this, actually, just to give him a name check, my friend Matt Latham, who's been watching the episodes for the first time, he's often said to me he feels like Scully is just put in danger for the sake of it, or, there's a lot of... Certainly in the earlier in season 1 and parts of season 2, she is not used as effectively as Mulder in terms of driving the story or having that agency. And I think this season 2 has got steadily better at that as the season goes on. But this is a really good first example of when they do that well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Matt's right. I think you've got to sort of... I suppose for mid-90s TV, there was a bit of a double standard with the way female protagonists were treated in that way. It's definitely a fair criticism. I mean, there's a bit of a double standard because Mulder gets himself into trouble. Mulder breaks into a base, or he, breaks into the place in the Erlenmeyer flask, and he gets into trouble that way. Whereas in something like Squeeze, I suppose, Scully's just minding her own business and trouble finds her. But what's really good here is how it's done in a very, I don't know what to say, it's done in such a good way because it's a great opportunity for some character development. And it's not just done for the sake of it, whereas in some episodes, that is done for the sake of it, and it's not so good.
Yeah, it doesn't always work. But I think, like you say, the fact that she has that agency about her is really important.
Yeah, because obviously in the abduction storyline, I mean, those were great episodes, really, but because Gillian Anderson was basically, she'd just given birth and so on, she wasn't given the same opportunity. So to do kind of a... not a retread, but this experience is kind of a deliberate echo of the earlier experience in a certain way. But to do it in a non-supernatural way means that she can't be saved by the fact that in sci-fi, alien abductions, alien abductees get returned. She has to, it has to be resolved in a different way. Yeah, Chris Carter did a really good job here, I've got to say.
Yeah, he did. He did do a great job. As he does with the counselling scene, which is a really powerful scene, really brilliantly written, where Scully goes to see Karen Kosseff, who reappears a couple of times as well in later seasons, in a couple of later seasons. Season 4, I think, she comes back in Elegy, I think, when Scully's struggling with dying of cancer. This scene is really good because it manages to get into her psychology more than would normally happen in an episode. It has the facility to actually explore how she feels about Mulder in certain ways. Karen asks questions about, whether she trusts Mulder and, the underlying reasons as to why she's struggling to cope with this case. And she says things like she trusts Mulder, but she can't tell him how much this bothers her because she doesn't want to feel like he needs to protect her. That after she was abducted and he nearly destroyed him, she's come back on in work, and she's consistently said, right since Firewalker, she said, "I'm okay. I need to be at work. I'm fine. I don't need you to look after me." But it's a really logical reason for Scully not to actually be able to open up to Mulder in the way that she does to a counsellor, to somebody separate from the whole thing. It's very clever.
It's very clever, yeah. It's a great scene. It's very well performed, isn't it? It's almost like the investigation pauses until Scully can sort of resolve her feelings in a certain sense. Because it's not until she's worked through some of this stuff that she then goes back and the fingerprint is found, and sort of things can proceed. So it's actually quite an unusual choice, isn't it? To have it's probably a 3 or 4 minute long scene.
Yeah.
At a critical point of the episode, a reflective scene like this it's such a great choice.
I think, yeah, it is, but I think it's really well earned and important to the story itself. And I think that's why you chose to do it. In that, it's not arbitrary. It's not just pausing for breath. It is actually the crucial character point that Scully needs to get through in order for the episode to have its effect. And for it's a handy way of also stopping for breath and allowing the writing to actually explore the fact that she's lost her father, she's been abducted, and that she's lost a little bit of faith in how to do her job. And she says that. She says, I want to regain the faith I can do my job properly. And it's you can't do that in episodes like Aubrey. For all I really liked Aubrey, and we talked about it recently, it was a good episode. You can't necessarily do that in episodes like that, your standard stories. The usual conspiracy mythology episodes are so tied up with Mulder's quest or lots and lots of stuff going on. Again, you don't always have the time to be able to stop for breath and do that. So the fact he does manage to weave that in and make it work really well is a testament to how well this script is written, really.
I agree, absolutely.
It's great. It is really good. And like you say, she gets the print. It allows Mulder and Box to find Donnie. And there's a lovely moment where she rings Mulder as well. And he says, look, are you all right? Do you need to take some time off? And she says, no, look, I'm coming back. You could use my help. And he just says, always. It's just lovely.
It is. It's a very nice moment.
Because he's just like, of course I need you. Of course I need you here. But he doesn't... Mulder's great in this because he doesn't push her. He doesn't sort of say to her, look, I need you back. I've got to... He's remarkably unselfish for Mulder, actually.
No, this is one of the most sort of appealing sort of sides of Mulder we've seen, I'd say. Because, I mean, if this had been a case that had some kind of religious connotation, the Mulder we'd have seen would have been very different. He'd have been much more sort of aggressive and... not aggressive, but you know what I mean? He'd have pushed back in a certain way. I really like seeing him like this.
Yeah, he's great, isn't he? When he's not having to face, the religious aspects or things like that. When he's actually it's just about her welfare. He's really caring, he's really understanding, and he just wants her to be okay. And that's really good. And it shows the continuing depth of their relationship, which is excellent. Just in little lines, just really comes, and in the performances, just the way David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson put it across is just lovely. But yeah, so this is Act 3 now. The plot is racing. They find Donnie's flat. They find the finger in the fridge. And then obviously Scully is rammed off the road by Donnie, and she's taken prisoner, really. But it's not for too long, really. She's not captive for a massive amount of time. It's probably for about 10 minutes. But a lot is done in that 10 minutes. You get... For starters, you get Donnie now. Obviously, he's sort of on the run. And he makes the strange choice of going to the one place they're going to look, his mother's house.
That's a good point, yeah.
I did think that. I think, surely, but I think at this point he's not thinking, is he? He's just consumed with Scully, consumed with doing to Scully what he's done to all these women and everything like that.
He must have thought he had sufficient time, to get everything sort of done before they found him.
Yeah, maybe. But I think there's some really interesting things. For starters, the set itself of his mother's house, I think Nutter shoots this brilliantly because it's this big gothic old house, but it's empty. But it's all full of like blue light, dark shadows, long hallways.
Yeah,
it's like his tabernacle. It's like his temple. It's just exactly the kind of place he would do these horrendous things.
Yeah, and it's exactly the kind of place kind of a horror film would end up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I'd like to have spent... That sounds odd, but I'd like to have spent a bit more time in that location. Do you know what I mean? It was such a kind of rich place to stage a scene.
It is, and like you said earlier, you made that point about Norman Bates. It is a bit Bates Motel-y. It does have that sort of element to it. You're absolutely right there. It's got a kind of personality. Even though you don't see it very much, it's got that sort of sense of personality.
Because I like the moment where he says, it's after she escapes, but he says... I know this house, He's kind of hinting at the sort of history of the place.
I know this house, girly girl. There's no way out, girly girl.
At that point, he's full-on kind of horror villain, isn't he?
He is.
when he starts spewing catchphrases.
Girly girl. That's just really terrifying. Girly girl. What I really like, though, as well, is that he doesn't... There's no point where Donnie does that typical villain thing where he explains his psychology to her, or he tries to sort of, have that moment where he's taught... They don't... X-Files is quite good at that, in that you don't get the villains like this, the monsters, do that too often. Toombs never did that. Donnie also doesn't. There's no point where he sits down with Scully and he's talking to her about things which help us understand him. He's just... instead you get the really nebulous shape-shifting bit.
Right, yeah.
Let's hit this head on, all right? So,
okay.
I think Donnie is a demon.
Okay. I don't think Donnie's a demon.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Everyone, you need to vote, right? Okay, yeah. You need to let us know who's right on this one.
Let me tell. I think I know where you're coming from, because I think where you're coming from is that you've obviously seen Orison in season 7, and I know how much you love sort of canon, Tony. And I think what you're trying to do is, I think you're wanting to join all the dots between the two episodes, which is fair enough. I absolutely get that. I think where I'm coming from is, I don't think that when they made Irresistible that was the intention. I think the intention was the stuff with Donnie as a demon is intended as a kind of a visual metaphor, basically. Whereas I would argue when they came back to make Orison, these parts of the episode are what they sort of could point to and say, oh yeah, this is how we can justify making him supernatural. So I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think when they made this episode that was what we were intended to think.
Do you know what? I think that's fair, and I think while I think in the broader terms of the entire Donnie arc that he is a supernatural creature, I think you're right. Probably. Interestingly, Carter talks about how there are reports of people who had been under the spell of Jeffrey Dahmer, who we mentioned earlier, who actually claimed that he shapeshifted during those hours when they were held hostage, that his image actually changed. So, and obviously, Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't, as far as we know, a demonic creature. He was evil, but he was, he wasn't a demon, a literal demon. So maybe the idea behind this is that, and I mentioned it earlier, that there's some sort of psychic hypnosis thing going on here, that Donnie actually, whether or not this is part of the fact he's a demon or not, he has some sort of power to influence the mind and to actually put these things in Scully's head. In some weird way, she's been his victim from the very beginning of the episode, his intended victim, that he knew about her already, although that's contradicted when he asks who she is. So it is nebulous. It isn't. It's not clear, but it could be
for discussion. Certainly,
there are things that go for and against it. Really,
I suppose what I would say is, obviously she's under great psychological kind of duress. We've seen her a couple of times earlier in the episode. She's having visions which aren't reliable, whether it's in her sleep or in the crime, looking at the crime scene photos. All those things lead me to believe that the moment where she looks at the guy and he changes appearance could also be another example of this, where she needs to see. She finds it easier to cope, possibly, seeing something supernatural, which isn't there, than with coping with Donnie Faster, the human, who's so disturbing in like a different way.
Which is really ironic, isn't it? If that's true, given that Scully doesn't believe in the supernatural, that she's more prepared to consider visualizing a demon and seeing a demon than being able to see him as a real man. And maybe it goes back to her faith, the idea, if she believes in God, she has to believe in the devil. It just becomes part of that. That's the thing that they get into more and more with the religious episodes, whether or not, Scully can't believe in aliens, but she can believe in heaven and hell and things like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, but also there's a bit of a, similarity to something like Beyond the Sea, where that's an occasion where she found herself able to entertain the possibility that something paranormal is happening. Obviously that was done in a different way. Isn't it great that it's so sort of, what's the word? It's so up for discussion.
Yeah, it is. It's unclear. And, I'm finding as we go through these episodes, Aubrey was a good example last time of something that Brandon and I really debated as to whether or not it was nature versus nurture, or it was something else, or there was a psychic thing going on in that episode. Very different episode, but, a similar something that was open for debate. And it's really interesting that we get to do that. Taking Orison out of the question, in that looking at it from the point of view when this was made, which you're absolutely right. It is fascinating, and there are two sides to it. So,
if she had thought it was, something that was literally happening when she escaped, or when she gets kind of rescued, or she escapes at the end, she doesn't mention to Mulder, as far as we see, that she's seen, somebody shapeshift. If this had been really happening, she would have had direct first-hand contact with like a paranormal event.
Yeah, well, this is it.
But
yeah, so yeah.
I don't get the sense that's what she thinks has happened necessarily.
Yeah. I did wonder that, actually. I thought to myself, well, if he's really shape-shifting in front of you, and this is before they see, she sees the alien bounty hunter shapeshift in a few episodes. But if she really saw that, it would be one of those things, and that is one of the holes in the X-Files, in that Scully sees far too much over the years to be able to logically still be skeptic, but probably about season 4, realistically. You're pushing it even by then. But yeah, it's open to debate. So let us know what you think, guys. If what do you think it means? Is she really seeing it? Is he really a demon? Let us know. Let us know on that one. But you've got the great final moment where she's rescued. There's a bit of a tussle. She's they burst in. He's arrested, and then she just breaks down, and she just grapples. She practically grapples Mulder, and just hugs him completely, and just cries. And it's one of those. And he's just there saying, it's okay, it's fine. And it's lovely because it shows that real bond now and that connection they have.
Yeah, it's massively well earned, isn't it, that moment?
Yeah.
From this episode and from the things we've seen in other episodes, it feels right.
Hugely. And then it's finally left for Mulder to do a bit of a wrap-up voiceover. We see pictures of evil young Donnie, who looks like Damien, doesn't he, as he's growing up?
He does.
Which is surely intentional.
Yeah.
And getting to the point where you have that final resting shot of Nick Chinland half in shadow, when Mulder basically makes the point that this X-File is the most terrifying because it could happen to any of us. And that's the key thing, isn't it? It's Irresistible is so scary because there could well be people out there who do this. If Donnie isn't supernatural and he is just a human monster, there probably are people out there who desecrate the dead, who have sex with the dead, who do all these horrendous things and who kill. And that is more scary than aliens and vampires and ghosts, isn't it?
It is, and that's another thing which points me towards him being kind of just human, is that voiceover functions much better if he is just a man, I think.
Yeah, I think it probably does. Oh, yes, I might have to change my opinion on this.
Oh,
your argument is convincing, I've got to say. But we'll revisit it in probably when I'm about 70, when we finally get to season 7. And we see the return of Donnie Faster in season 7's Origin, but we're a long way from that yet. But he will be back. He will be back one day.
The conquest of fear lies in the moment of its acceptance. In understanding what scares us most is that which is most familiar, most commonplace. That boy next door, Donnie Faster, the unremarkable younger brother of 4 older sisters, extraordinary only in his ordinariness, could grow up to be the devil in a button-down shirt. It's been said that the fear of the unknown is an irrational response to the excesses of the imagination. But our fear of the everyday, of the lurking stranger, and the sound of footfalls on the stairs, the fear of violent death and the primitive impulse to survive, are as frightening as any X-File, as real as the acceptance that it could happen to you.
So yeah, that's Irresistible. There we go then. That's the end of this episode. We don't have a quiz because we're not doing the quiz as much now because I'm, starting to lose people who want to do the podcast with me because I put them through that bloody quiz. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna leave it there for this week. So it's been really great to do this with you, Carl. I'm really glad you came on to talk Irresistible.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. I've really enjoyed it too.
It's been brilliant. It's been brilliant. Where can people find what you're up to and what you're doing then online?
Yeah, if people want to look me up on Twitter, that's good. @CSweeney 758 on Twitter. I'm mainly tweeting about the X-Files or old films or a bit of UK politics, but I'm happy to talk to anyone. So, that's where you should find me on Twitter.
Awesome. You're very active in the Xcast blog and the communities and things like that. You're also writing for the X-Files Lexicon, I believe, aren't you?
Yeah, I've recently done their guide to Die Hand die Verletzt. So it's not up on the site yet, but it will be soon, hopefully.
Ace, that's coming up very soon for us. That's our next season 2 episode. I love that one. I love that episode.
Brilliant one. Yeah,
it's great.
I love it too.
It's great fun. So yeah, brilliant. Look up Carl's stuff, guys. It's great. He's a brilliant contributor to the Xcast. I'm very grateful to have him on our blog team because he's brilliant. It keeps me in check a lot as well. Points out things I'm not getting right. You have been an absolute boon to me being able to do the X-Files episode tournament, which has been going on Twitter. Which as you listen to this, we'll have put the poll out for the episode that's going to come back and and from the dead, as it were. But yeah, you need to keep your eyes on that, guys. But
the episode may or may not be Babylon. We'll see.
Oh God! Oh my God! We'll see. Oh, we'll save that for another day. But yeah, we obviously you can find us on Twitter as well at the X_cast. And we're on Facebook at the Xcast, and we've got our Xcast fan group, the Xcast podcast fan group. You can find us in there, posting. There's quite a lot of us in there. Come in, join us. Everybody's welcome. Join us for some X-Files chatter, and you can also find us obviously on iTunes. If you would leave us a review, that would be lovely. It would help us get further known. And you can email us at the xfcast@gmail.com with any thoughts or anything you might want to contribute. So yeah, get involved. We our community's growing. We've got lots of people interested listening to the show. So yeah, get in touch. Absolutely. We're going to be back with a special episode for you off the back of Irresistible. Actually, we're treating you. We had a week off the other week, but we're going to treat you this week. We've got the next episode of season 2 coming soon. But before then, myself and Darren Mooney recorded a special episode on Chris Carter's The After, which was his pilot episode that he did for an Amazon TV show just before the season 10 of the X-Files came back, and it didn't go to series. But Darren and I have recorded a podcast, and we're going to be doing this every now and then. We're going to do spotlights on certain on the X-Files writers. So we're going to try and tether it to some of their most famous episodes that they've written. So we thought for Chris Carter, let's start off by doing his most recent non-X-Files thing. So yeah, join us. I think that's going out on Tuesday. So join us for that, for a special episode, talking The After. So yeah, that'll be fun. Join us for our next episode, guys. But remember, as ever, trust no one, girly girl. The Xcast is produced and presented by Tony Black, part of the Black Hole Media podcast network. Title music is courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.
I'd like to run you a bath.